do you think it's harder for women filmmakers to launch their projects?
Sure, I'll answer that. Yes, I do. I think things have changed a lot and are changing, and that's really great. But I think if you did a deep dive into what's still happening, you would find out that women still have a harder time getting funding for their projects. When they get funding for the projects, it's usually less than the money they need. And so if you have less money than you need to make a film, you can't make it as competitively as you would like. And so that impacts on where your film ends up. And I think that women filmmakers, when they focus on stories about women, girls, film identifying, their work is marginalized. I'd made a film, it's very much like the short film Until She's Free, about women's sexuality. And I had someone tell me that they thought that was a niche like market, and I was really, it's half the population of the world. And so I think it's still very hard for women to make films. It's getting better, but it's still very hard.
Anyone else want to chime in on that?
Ditto.
I think that's why I tend to feel like I carve out my own world, and why, certain spaces do feel more friendly. Like I find a lot of my work has started out in PBS or a lot of those, similar public funded spaces, because there's a little bit more equity. And obviously that's a controversial conversation. I'm sure that people have different experiences in those spaces too, but I agree, it's a little more, it's been challenging.
Anyone else want to comment on that? Okay, so my follow-up question then is the flip side, and it's doing stories about women. You've all done stories about women. What are the challenges of that in terms of getting it to market?
Well, I guess I would just echo what Maria said, which is if you are a woman making film about women, and especially about some specific feminist politics, you just get marginalized. Even now, in a time where it feels like the conversation around these issues is opening up and there's more opportunity, I still feel like those projects get sidelined as niche, which seems crazy, but I don't know, it's something I've experienced for decades. So I haven't seen a huge shift in it.
Anyone else want to add anything to that?
I don't want to be the one who keeps saying terribly negative things, but I think what happens is there's a certain subject matter that the gatekeepers of the documentary world deem has gravitas, right? Important subjects that we all need to know about. And those subjects are often not exclusively related to women, like they're bigger, larger issues. And so when you have a film which is about the lives of women and what their challenges are, or anything about them, then it doesn't have the same gravitas as something that usually a male filmmaker will make. Like Alex Gibney, he makes, I don't know, 7 films a minute, I think. He makes so many films, and never seems to have a hard time finding money for those films. And I have colleagues, male colleagues, who have never had a hard time getting funding for their films. Not all of them, but a lot of them. And so I think that, women and women of color and people of color have a much harder time, even though things are changing, and they should change, but we have a long way to go. Ken Burns, I don't know, what is he doing now? I don't even know what he's doing now. He's making so many films, it's ridiculous. And there was a big conversation around how the majority of PBS money goes to him and keeps going to him. And yet, it was lip service paid to it. It really was. I don't think there'll be a lot of big changes.
Meg, I want to ask you specifically, because your film, Knocking Down the Fence, is basically almost the story of women filmmakers in their own way, about breaking down that barrier, underpayment, that whole thing. Can you talk a little bit about that, about your experience making that film?
Yeah, well, and I absolutely think, can you all hear me? I'm Just want to make sure. Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
I absolutely think that there's a parallel with women's sports and women filmmakers and stories about women, and this idea that there might not be a market for it, which is absurd. But it absolutely factors into how much money is going to these athletes or going to these filmmakers. But one of the things that I was thinking about as everyone was commenting, and I agree with everything that's been said, but there's also this added burden, I think, to get it right when there aren't going to be 10 stories about, take AJ Andrews. I mean, if she was a male athlete, there would already be a feature-length film or two about her probably, but instead there's an absence of voices telling stories. And so I think we as filmmakers telling stories that aren't just about like cis white men, there is, I think, a real responsibility to listen, to like take into account our identities and our bias as well, and make sure that we're putting, like, it might be the only story, the only film about AJ or whatever we've done. And so I think that's kind of a layer that comes into it, that responsibility and thoughtfulness that's required.